afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Graz van Egmond, and I'm the CEO of the Banksia Foundation. Look, I'm really thrilled to be co-hosting our first Australian Sustainability Success Stories, that's a hard one, Success Stories webinar series. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we operate, live, and gather, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water, and community. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'm coming to you from the beautiful lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung peoples, which is the Macedon Ranges in Victoria, for any of you who might have come out here and visit us. It's a lovely area, and I've only been here for 3 years, but enjoying every moment of it. So look, please let us know which lands you are coming from on the chat function, because it's always interesting to find out where people are coming from. So our first series is bringing together the heroes behind our success stories, the many organisations that are providing the tools, the platforms, the information, and that important support that assists us in breaking our way through to meeting our 2030 targets and hopefully exceeding them. I'm so proud to announce one of our major supporters for the Banksia Awards this year is Edge Environment, and they are co-hosting today's webinar. So let me introduce you to Ashleigh Gay, Head of Sustainability Leadership at Edge Environment. Welcome, Ashleigh.
Thanks so much, Graz. Pleasure to be here, and lovely to see everyone and people, I think, kind of starting to put where they're coming from in the chat, which is fantastic. So really delighted to be here. So I guess at Edge, we've been thinking about what it takes for an organisation to be a leader in sustainability. And one of the things that we've found is that for many organisations, one of the things that we're not necessarily great at doing is talking about our successes and the amazing things that we've collectively achieved in sustainability. So there's a couple of areas of opportunity that we've noticed and that we're working with clients on at the moment. So, you know, they're things like really understanding your audience in sustainability. You know, there's a lot of interest in sustainability, and it's growing day by day. And ultimately, it's about knowing whether you're needing to connect with that really specialist audience that needs that data and that disclosure, and those really kind of those key proof points in a sort of easy to kind of find fashion. And those audiences are increasingly knowledgeable about what they're looking for and what's good and what's not so good. But then also we've got a really growing set of audiences that are kind of more in that generalist space. So what we're finding is that many organizations are trying to navigate that. How do we strike the balance? When are we talking that specialist sustainability language? And it is a language. We have created a language for ourselves. And when do we need to come up and out of that and actually talk about the message and what we're trying to do and really make sure we're taking that sort of audience-led approach? So that's one thing that kind of I wanted to share and would really love to kind of unpack over today's discussion. I think the other thing that we've noticed is that we don't always talk about what goes wrong and what's hard. And I think, you know, those organizations that are leaders are transparent about that. So, you know, you'll open a sustainability report and, you know, in the first sort of 4 or 5 pages, there's a great kind of highlights reel of the things that we're really proud of. But one of the things that we'd love to see alongside that is, what are the things that we stuffed up? What are the things that didn't go right? What are the things that were hard? What are the things that we don't understand? Because that greater honesty, which is, you know, where I guess kind of we see a lot of the conversation is, hang on, we don't quite know how to do that. We don't have all of the answers, but that's a really important piece of the puzzle. And I think those leading organizations kind of are figuring that out and starting to kind of do that, which is great to see. I think the other thing that we really like to see as well is actually a much closer working relationship between the sustainability team, the corporate affairs team, and the marketing team. You know, we would love to see that to be the closest working relationship in corporate Australia, because I think it's what we need. Sustainability needs those skills to help take it out of that sort of sometimes kind of quite specialist box and open it up. And equally, at the other side of the spectrum, we never want to be greenwashing. We always want to be taking that science-led approach and having that strong foundation in place. So I think they were just some sort of thought starters that we wanted to share. And I guess kind of thinking about, you know, those amazing organizations, many of them are on the call today, that are doing amazing things in sustainability and are really kind of being those fantastic heroes and sort of shining the light. Many of the other organizations in Australia are trying to think about, well, what are the things that we need to do to kind of get to that point? And they're just some observations that we thought might be helpful to share. Thanks, Graz.
Thanks, Ashleigh. Look, a really good point, and just underlining the fact of what goes wrong. Having looked and being part of the judging process for Banksia for 22 years, it's really interesting. And people, when they put in the entry, don't want to put what goes wrong, but when some of our entries come in and they state what goes wrong and how they solved it, and the judges get really excited because, again, they're discovering, how they did this, and it's pushed them to that next point. So, as I said, if you failure is not true failure, it's just the next stepping stone to success. So that is so important. And the other thing you were saying, integration, within organisations between marketing, the sustainability unit, the PR, department, that is so key. And yes, again, we would love to see that being utilised a bit more in that collaboration, SDG 17 partnerships working a bit more. Anyway, let's get into our exciting presenters today. So let's delve into our key industry and business organisations that we've got for you today, who are driving and underpinning Australia's move and who are helping all of us to reach our sustainability goals. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Edwina Clowes, Manager of Sustainability Framework and Stakeholders for the Meat and Livestock Australia. Edwina, welcome.
Thanks, Graz. Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity. And at Meat and Livestock Australia, we're really, really proud to be a sponsor of the Banksia Foundation Awards. For those of us who don't know us, our purpose is to invest in research, development and marketing activities that support sustainable development of the Australian red meat and livestock industry. So we're the service providers for industry. We're led through the Red Meat Advisory Council, and we're led through some really key priority areas such as the Red Meat 2030 Industry Strategic Plan, the MLA 2025 Strategic Plan and our annual industry investment plans, and the Australian beef and sheep sustainability frameworks. So for us, sustainability is all about, I guess, production of livestock in a way that is like environmentally, financially and socially responsible with respect to our people, our livestock, our natural resources and the environment. And focusing our investments and demonstrating that sustainability can go hand in hand with productivity and long-term intergenerational success. And industry has set some really ambitious targets to double the value of our red meat sales and to be the trusted source of the highest quality protein by 2030, for our industry to be carbon neutral by 2030, to be world leaders in animal health, welfare, well-being and production practices, and world leaders in environmental management and sustainability practices. And I think it's really important to remember that when it comes to Australia, most of our land mass cannot really support any other forms of production or food production. In fact, less than the 10% of our land mass can support crop production. So that's really important to think about when you're looking at land use and land opportunities in Australia and how we feed our country and feed our world. But realistically, ruminants is one of the very few options for the most of our country. And that also means that gives us responsibility for the livestock industry. It gives us responsibility because as custodians of so much of our country, we are really uniquely placed to play a really critical role in becoming part of the carbon neutral solution. So in 2017, industry launched the Carbon Neutral 2030 initiative. It's a flagship initiative with the ambition of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by our industry by 2030. To date, we've already achieved quite a bit. The industry has already reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 53% since Paris baseline year of 2005. And that represents a total reduction from 22% to 12% of our industry's proportion of national greenhouse gas emissions. So we're pretty proud of that. We don't think any other industry has come close to that reduction to date, but there's still a long way to go. But our CSIRO modelling demonstrates that CN30 is achievable, that we still can achieve CN30 and double the value of red meat sales within our current livestock numbers, and that much of that science and technology is already available for adoption or in the process of investigation and being rolled out. And last year we released the Carbon Neutral 2030 Roadmap, and that focuses on 4 key future areas to focus on, particularly around emissions avoidance, and carbon sequestration. We really haven't got much time to go into that at the moment, but I'm certainly happy to take questions. The other key industry priorities we've got are the Australian sheep and the Australian beef sustainability frameworks. The beef sustainability framework reported on its 4th annual update this year, and the sheep sustainability framework is actually the first world food and fibre framework, and that was officially launched this year. Important to really highlight that these frameworks are industry-led initiatives, and they map for industry a sustainability pathway of best practice. They track our progress and our performance through independent evidence that's aligned to specific indicators relevant to animal welfare, environmental stewardship, economic resilience, and people and community. Our frameworks are clearly aligned to international and national standards, including the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's really important. And best practice accountability, responsibility, and sustainability. And that enables us to stand up to really the most rigorous scrutiny. And we know, look, as you know, as market forces and influences escalate, be they through international commitments, through COP, corporate risk, social license risks, that these frameworks are going to become increasingly important in demonstrating our commitment and our progress. And we're increasingly seeing that these frameworks are becoming more important reference points of best practice, you know, for our stakeholders and our supply chain partners to set their own standards and verification and certification systems against. So as I mentioned, we have still got a long way to go, but we've had some good runs already. We can proudly say that the Australian and beef and sheep industries are free of all exotic diseases, and that gives us access and continued access to over 100 markets. We've reduced our carbon footprint by 53% since baseline year 2005. 71% of our cattle producers are breeding livestock that are naturally polled, and 30% of our cattle producers are using pain relief, but that equates to approximately 70% of the cattle herd. And our industry is continuing to enjoy increasing demand for our products internationally and domestically. So that's a really high capture, Graz, of our sustainability commitments, the progress and priorities and what we've done today. Really happy to take questions later, but thank you. And again, very honoured MLA is to be part of these prestigious awards. Thanks, Graz.
Thanks, Edwina. Look, and I must admit, it's really opened my eyes since we've started the relationship with you. Just the frameworks, the work that you've done, the research, the whole thing, it's been really exciting to see, and how you're leading, as I said, and bringing people along the journey with you, which I think is really important. So I think that having someone to feel secure with and knowing that you're doing the right thing is so important. So thanks, Edwina, so much. Ash, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Graz. I'm delighted to now introduce Jayne Paramour from APCO. Jayne, we've seen a lot of amazing momentum in the last couple of years in the packaging space, from mainstream consumer concern and action through to the setting of national targets. I'm sure it's been a pretty busy time for you guys. Tell us about that, and tell us about, I guess kind of striking that balance between getting those kind of fundamentals right in that sort of through that kind of technical lens, and then how your network and partners are kind of then translating that into something that ultimately consumers are demanding.
Mute. Sorry, turn the mute off. You'd think I'd know by now. Thank you, Ash. That's a really interesting point to start from. I'm just listening to the conversation so far, and there's some amazing stuff coming out. Just that applies across the board with all of us that are working in this sustainability space. I think we've got a lot of common issues that we face. I just also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I think they're a very important voice in this space, and I encourage any participation from that community, because I think we have a lot to learn from them. Working for APCO, we are kind of a strange beast. I can see a few of my colleagues on the line this afternoon. Please indulge me, you guys. For those of you who don't know about APCO, we are the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation. We are created under a piece of regulation set out by the Commonwealth Government, the National Environment Protection Measure for Used Packaging Materials. Who knew there was even a regulation for that? A lot of people, it appears, don't. Part of our role in that spectrum is we are established to administer the Australian Packaging Covenant, which is a voluntary product stewardship scheme set up underneath that NEPM to provide a supported pathway for businesses in Australia putting packaging into the marketplace to meet their compliance obligations associated with the regulation. So businesses come to us for support in meeting those compliance requirements as a first pass, but we also provide them with an awful lot of support and guidance, knowledge, understanding of the marketplace in the Australian context for them to make informed decision-making choices in terms of the way that they employ packaging in the deployment of their products. So we work with packaging right across what we call the packaging value chain. We deal with people putting materials into the marketplace, converting it into packaging materials, turning it into packaging, putting their products in it and sending it out to their end users and their consumers. And then we also work with the other end of the chain, the resource recovery section, bringing all that material back through the waste systems that exist at the moment and trying to put it back into secondary uses, further uses, and effectively build a circular economy for packaging in Australia. So that's where we sit. We're not a prescriptive organisation. We're, I guess, a knowledge driver. We try to provide that information as clearly and comprehensively, and you talk about language, as understandably as possible to industry so that they understand exactly what they're dealing with when they're talking packaging, and they can have an informed conversation with their own suppliers, but also with the people that they're selling their products to. So we sit there in the middle of that space, and because of the fact that we work with all that that difference around the packaging value chain, we have a really unique opportunity to talk to all those people and understand exactly what that circular model looks like, understand where the pinch points are, the pressure points, things like that, and support them to actually work through them and find solutions. We're guided by the national packaging targets, which are 100% of packaging will be recyclable, reusable, or compostable by 2025. 70% of plastic packaging will be reusable, recycled or composted by 2025. We will have 50% recycled content across all packaging materials in the marketplace by 2025. And we will phase out a lot of the problematic and unnecessary packaging materials that exist in the marketplace that we're losing through issues with collection systems and end markets for those materials if they are being recovered. So it's really filling all those gaps around the flow of materials around the system, and those targets underpin everything that we do. We have that common focus of working towards that, and we do it in a number of ways. Working groups within our own organisation. We are also hosts to the Australia, New Zealand and Pacific Islands Plastics Pact with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we operate across the region. And we're really just trying to, I guess, identify where those solutions are and work with businesses and organisations involved in the sustainability landscape, whatever they may be, to, I guess, drive and deliver those solutions as we get towards 2025. So, yeah, looking across the whole spectrum and trying to find the answers, really. And as you say, complexity, what's hard? It's all hard. It's really hard. But there are a lot of people working towards the same objectives and working very hard to find those solutions. So it's a really buoyant and exciting landscape to be operating in at the moment, I must say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jayne, for the amazing work that that you do. I think one of the things I really liked about what you shared there is really that, you know, it's not the why or the what anymore, it's the how. Like, how do we actually now go about doing these things and making these changes? And, you know, what you were talking about in terms of knowledge and empowering and support and guidance and tools is what we need. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Back to you, Graz.
Thanks, Ashleigh. Okay, now I'm very privileged to introduce Andrew Petersen, who is the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. Andrew, a number of years ago, you and I were tracking around Warsaw at COP, whatever it was, and enjoying vodka and tripe. So that takes us back. Well, I was teaching you how to drink vodka and I was trying to get you to eat tripe, but you didn't go there. But yeah, look, I see you've got G'day Glasgow behind you, which we've been watching every night. So I'm sure you'll talk about it. But welcome, Andrew. And if you want to let us know what BCSDA is doing.
Thanks, Graz. I'm not quite sure that was the introduction I was hoping for, but we'll move on from that. And I can't help but notice that the conveners of this particular webinar made sure that the two Andrews went at the end. So I feel your pain, Andrew Davies. Yes, my name is Andrew Petersen. I'm the CEO of the artist formerly known as the Sustainable Business Australia, now known as the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. Please don't ask us why we went for a longer name. That's not worth the time or the 5 minutes that I actually have. We've been asked to talk about three things. The first is define our target audience and why our audience is important. Well, no element of society at the moment is unimportant in relation to the need for system change. So under the banner of leading change together, our mission is to make sustainable business more successful. And in that regard, it's interesting that we're often confused as being a bingo. And for anybody watching the climate negotiations at the moment, you will hear all of these acronyms going on, bingos and youngos and tungos and engos. Well, I've come up with a new one. We're a blango, a business-led learning advocacy action NGO. And we've been around for quite some time, and I won't bore you with quite how long we've been around. I put it into the chat function if you've got a spare few years to have a look at, but we've just ticked over 30 years as an organisation. And it's fascinating. In the opening, there was a question about tell us your failures. Well, I guess one of the failures was that we're having the need to have this conversation. In other words, we haven't yet, as a society, embedded sustainable development into it doesn't need to be talked about as a separate conversation. But in that regard, perhaps we're seeing the signals, particularly coming out of COP now. I think the important negotiations that happened at that other COP not so long ago, COP15, and more broadly, I think that the business-led action around issues on nature, climate and equality really do serve an important signal about how capitalism is really starting to change quite dramatically. So our raison d'etre is, as I think we're all aware, the urgency of climate action, the loss of nature, the mounting inequality that's posing to businesses licensed to operate in their safe operating space for humanity, means that within our membership and I guess across the broader business community generally, we are actually seeing a massive momentum for systemic change around energy systems, natural systems, and Jayne spoke to some of those, particularly food systems and human capital, human and social capital interactions that are aligned, as Edwina pointed out, to the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think that we would all speak with one voice that these complex problems require collaborative solutions. There's no one company, there's no one government, there's no one community, or dare one say, there's no one association on this panel that has all the solutions. And together we have to have an interaction that identifies action rather than talking about this inaction coming at a cost. Well, action comes at a value, whether that's on climate, whether it's on nature, or whether it's equality. So the work that we're undertaking right at this particular moment, I put under a couple of categories. The first is we actually hold our members to account, and quite recently we announced the adoption of a number of set of science-based membership criteria, which again, I've just dropped into the chat function, membership criteria that align with Australian business wanting to see a transition to a net zero emissions, nature positive and reduced inequality environment. And that is expected of the members. And what surprised me was when I put it to them, they said, absolutely, why wouldn't we want to be doing that? So I think that it's important for organisations that want to play in this space to actually show that they're being themselves held accountable to the very things they want others to do. We can't expect others to do it if we're not going to do it ourselves. The second is we are driving nature positive outcomes. We continue our work program with members on nature positive solutions through the Australian Business and Biodiversity Initiative, which is something we do with the Australian government and quite a number of green NGOs, as well as our role as the focal point, the Australian focal point for the Global Partnership on Business and Biodiversity in the lead up to next year's part 2 of COP15. Who knew you could have 2 parts to a COP? Well, we've got one. The third is, and this is, I think, one of the most fascinating, because I get to play with one of the organisations that's actually on this panel, which is APCO. We contribute and collaborate with them on the circular economy. And I find that particularly exciting because it's a key co-regulatory agency in this country that's done so much work in relation to how do we as a society think about the value of not plastic or packaging, but the importance of materials management going forward in a society where business as usual really is not acceptable. And you're seeing that also, I think, with the work that New South Wales Circular is doing. And we're fortunate to be on the task force with the Victorian government on the Circular Economy Business Innovation Centre. And just as I said before, this system change that seems to be occurring is just so exciting because you get to collaborate with others who are equally as enthused, but more importantly, have such a professional approach to the way in which we're going to address it. The one area that I think we've still got a lot to work on is the one of social capital. We work in a number of areas with the Sustainability Reference Committee of the Australian Industries Skills Committee, and we've just commenced our work with the Victorian Government's Clean Economy and Jobs and Task Force. But it's really at its nascent stages, and I suppose that's encouraging, but to a certain extent that if we are going to be truly honest around E, S and G, we have to understand that the S plays just as much as an important role to not just companies and not just society, but to associations themselves around how they're adding value as a whole. Lastly, on the issue of climate, as Graz said, and she's been a key watcher, that thing up behind me, G'day Glasgow, has been quite an important element of our work over the last couple of weeks. And we'll have more to say about our particular work program going into 2022 after we know what happens at that thing in Glasgow. And with that, I might just hand back to either Graz or I suspect I'm handing actually to Ash. Over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Just really interesting. Some of the words that you kept on mentioning is collaboration. And I know you and I have discussed this a lot, not working in silos, which I think is, as you say, you're a witness to this working with APCO. The other thing that you're talking about, solutions, contributions, action comes out of value, and the big thing that I think we all talk about is business as usual is not acceptable anymore, and this is one of the main things that we need to sort of go forward from here, that we need to find a new way of doing it. So Ash, over to you.
Fantastic, thanks Graz. And last but not least, I am delighted to introduce Andrew Davies, CEO of BLab Australia and New Zealand. Andrew, BLab has been redefining the role of business in society for a few years now. But how do Australian and New Zealand businesses stack up? Are we doing enough?
That's a great question to start me off on, and always a tough act to follow, Andrew, even if it is a double Andrew to finish this initial stage. Look, I think without doubt, and I'll share a couple of stats in terms of the growth in our region, but undoubtedly we've got some incredibly great business leaders and innovators in this space in our region. To introduce us properly, at BLab, and I loved your new acronym there, Andrew, and I think we often get called BLAB due to a fairly unfortunate brand there, so maybe I'll adopt some of your new approaches. But at BLab, our vision is for an inclusive, equitable and regenerative economic system for all people on the planet. And we really start with the proposition that the current economic system, driven by business as one of its key actors, is not meeting its promise to create positive impact, and of course is actually creating a lot of negative impacts. And I don't think that's a particularly controversial proposition. We go back to 2007 in the US, we landed in this region in 2013, and we operate as a global network. So each BLab is an independent entity, and we look after our region, and for me, that's Australia and a throw in New Zealand. For those of you who don't know, a B Corp is a business that meets the highest standards of social and environmental performance. So they measure and manage their impact across a range of criteria across environment, their community, their workers or in their employment practices, their suppliers, and they adopt governance models to hold themselves to account. And I think that idea, Andrew, you spoke about it, this idea that businesses are wanting to hold themselves to account is really what drives businesses to the B Corp world. It's that sense of either we think we're doing okay, but we want to know, or at an even more basic level, we want to be held to account and we want someone to help us understand what good accountability looks like. So as a certification, B Corps are put through a rigorous verification process where effectively we run an audit process to make sure that their practices match up to their promise. So our audience in that sense is really business, people in business, and we work with the leaders and the innovators. We look to identify those high performers so that others can learn and follow. And I think when we talk about systems change, you can probably summarize much of what we do around my good friend Milton Friedman, who I talk about a lot. It was actually the 50-year anniversary of his essay in the New York Times late last year. But for those of you who understand that doctrine, and those of you who don't, hit up Google. But the reality is we've all been living under this doctrine for an awfully long time. And it's a fig leaf. It's become the dominant view of the role of business, this idea that business exists to provide returns to shareholders. But in reality, it's an excuse framework for short-term decision-making. That's when it gets rolled out. And I think what's really interesting about the change that we're seeing at the moment is not just a new sense of accountability, but I think businesses are increasingly recognise that to succeed in the long term, it's actually good business practice to think about the impact that you're having on a wider set of stakeholders, and actually not just being accountable to that, but trying to contribute positive impact to stakeholders, which can include your employees, your local community, obviously the environment, as well as your shareholders. I think that what really drives me is the writings of someone like Simon Sinek, who talks about profit being the fuel of a business. And really, again, if you think about people who talk about the profitability of a business as the final outcome, that really heads us back down that funnel of thinking that the point of a business is to create profits. Well, the point of profit is to create the impact that a business can have. So to be honest, that probably sums up, I guess, the philosophy behind much of what we do. But coming back to the pragmatic or the basics of what we do, look, certifications are becoming it's quite a busy space at the moment, and they are really a great way for a business to be able to hold itself to account, and for a customer, whether it's a consumer or another business, to be able to understand what makes that business tick, what goes into its supply chain or into its employment practices. So certifications like fair trade or organic play a really important role. The distinction with B Corp is that it sits across the top, so it looks at all aspects. It's a holistic capture of a business's operations and its business model, and it will build on those other certifications. So you'll get credits if you are operating a fair trade certified supply chain. And I think for us, we see companies doing this at the moment, and I really resonate, Andrew, with this idea that it's about understanding not just the environmental impact, but the social consequences of what you do as well. So we get businesses coming to us, particularly looking to drive engagement with employees, but as well with their business partners, and building really resilient supply chains by working with their business partners. And I think this is sort of the hidden aspect of so much of sustainability is around building resilient business models that really truly understand what impact that they're having across a whole range of different criteria. And I think that's what makes B Corps a little bit interesting, is that they are businesses that do things differently and hold themselves to account. So I want to just go a little bit wider in my last couple of minutes and share a little bit of what we've seen in the last couple of years through the pandemic period. And we were certainly sitting there at the start of 2020 thinking, wow, is this going to be a real challenging moment? Because any certification is an additional cost burden on a business. It takes a lot of resources to commit to, and every accountant around the world in March last year was telling every business to cut costs down to the bone, prepare for a really tough time. But through the pandemic period, the demand for B Corp certification has only gone up. So we saw about a 60% increase in the number of users of our impact platforms last year. And the number that I found most compelling is that there's now 4,200 certified B Corps globally. It took us 15 years to get to that 4,000 mark. And in the last 16 months, we've had over 4,000 submissions to become certified. Now, not all of those will become B Corps. There's a tough process, but the point of that number, the sort of significance of it is just to show that the demand has simply gone through the roof in the last couple of years. And that's not just because B Corp's a good thing. I think it is absolutely because there's this growing awareness, this idea of a business needs to be accountable to have that social license to operate. I think we've also seen a real shift from sort of small business innovators to larger businesses legacy brands and operations seeking out certification and really following in the pathway of those early adopters. We've seen developments in business models, work such as the work of APCO, so important in enabling more businesses to become better. We've seen another really interesting conversation through the pandemic around what good practice is by having a robust and resilient supply chain. We've seen real risk conversations around what used to be the wisdom of business was you had a really super long, super lean supply chain. And we've seen some of those norms change really rapidly. And I think about businesses like Zara, who are being celebrated for their ability to just turn around an entire new season of clothes in absolutely no time, effectively chucking away, clothes that weren't selling and replacing them with clothes that were. It's amazing how quickly they've gone from being, held out as a business model success to being held out as kind of the pariah of the fashion sector. And I don't mean to disparage them. I know they do some great things in that business, but I think from a business model perspective, the changes that we've seen in the last couple of years have been really significant. So look, I'm quite optimistic. I think that in 5 years' time, perhaps, this idea of the social license to operate as a business is going through a fundamental change. Businesses are essentially, someone else described them as our greatest creation of artificial intelligence. They have the rights of people. They can own property. They can sue things. They can take legal action. And we often talk about a company did this or a company did that. They get limited liability and special taxation treatment. And we've really, I think, lost the idea that historically that came with a responsibility, that came often with a very specific purpose. And I think we're really heading back towards this idea of, hang on, if a business is going to enjoy those privileges, what is it doing to make our world a better place? I think that might sound a little bit warm and fuzzy, but the reality is it's translating to some really hard changes that's happening in the new capitalist model, because we're grappling with a pandemic, we're grappling with a climate crisis, and we're grappling with a rise in inequality that is sort of the underlying crisis that not as many people are talking about. But it's really stretching the social cohesion that we all need to have a capitalist system that's safe and robust and consistent. And I think that when capitalism itself is being challenged by its own players, that's when you see interesting moments of change. So I think we're working through a fascinating time at the moment, and I'm optimistic, although I think you also at the moment need to make a conscious decision to be optimistic, because quite frankly, some of the news that we're grappling with is quite overwhelming. So I'll stop talking there, but love to keep going about seeing what sort of questions that we get.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was fantastic and fascinating. There's a few things in there that I'd love to come back to when we kind of get into the Q&A shortly around, governance models for impact. The sort of discussion that I think a few of us have kind of touched on around elevating the S, elevating social, and making sure that that's kind of got kind of as much tension and focus and rigor as we do now kind of in, I guess, more of the environmental space. And then I think also this idea of purpose and how that intersects with the sustainability agenda that many businesses are pursuing is also something that we could have a whole other session on, I think. So thank you very much for your opening remarks. We'll now move into the Q&A session of today. And it looks like we've had a number of questions come through, which is fantastic. I might direct the first question to Andrew Petersen. And this has come from someone, Andrew, who's been following COP26 closely and loving your G'day Glasgow. What do you think is needed in Australia right now to accelerate systems change?
Ooh, it's always a dangerous one to answer. Any system is a function of essentially three elements: policy, finance, and infrastructure. And if you move those particular elements, you will shift to something else. It's as simple as that. At the moment, Australia seems to have arguably two of the three well and truly underway, if we're talking about climate. Not even those three in relation to nature. Circular economy, though, I'd say all three. It's quite amazing how that's shifted in a period of 18 months to 2 years, and Jayne could definitely speak better about that than I. On the social front, though, again, I don't think we've seen system change there at all. But what's fascinating is that you're seeing it happen in real time. The thing is that history will write this as the time at which there was the pivot. We're not talking about, has the tipping point occurred? Are we turning the corner? We're literally in it, and we're not seeing it because we are living it at this very minute. And my proof points are over the last few 10 days, and this is, I put up G'day Glasgow for no other reason that was the fastest way for me to learn what was going on every single day during the COP. And what I learned was there's an extraordinary sense of coordinated action on the most boring and inane elements of the economic system of our world that have the most profound changes. And the case in point is the announcement of the International Sustainability Standards Board. So IFRS Trust, Climate Disclosure Standards Board, Value Reporting Foundation indicated, what was it, Tuesday last week, that there's going to be this consolidation of these bodies into one board that is going to have the status of what is the International Accounting Standards Board. Now, rightly or wrongly, the importance and the elevation of that into the mindset of business has been transformative in barely 24 hours. Why? Because markets are moving as a result of there's going to be a new set of indicia around what is the value performance, exactly what Andrew Davies was just saying, right? Overnight, that's changed, right? But there was another one, and I have to actually turn to my note very quickly around it because it happened yesterday. And I think it's equally and fundamentally as important, the announcement of the Industrial Decarbonisation Initiative, which was launched yesterday, where nations have committed to disclose embodied carbon in major public construction projects by 2025. Now, boring as all get out, but does it move the dial in such a profound way? Absolutely. Both in public and private infrastructure, we're going to see for the first time ever, carbon embodied in those infrastructure projects, in the work that ISCA has been doing in Australia for such a long time, suddenly being validated as a key economic indicator going forward. So no government, let's take Australia, no government can properly go to its people and say, we are going to build a road, we are going to build a bridge, we are going to build this piece of public infrastructure, and not then give us that next baseline, well, what's the carbon content attached to it, and what does that mean if we invest in it, and is that the right way to go? That's how you change systems. For and on behalf of the Andrew Petersen Party, thank you.
I think if I could just add something there, I mean, there's a really interesting historical resonance here, which is so many of our existing accounting standards came about after the Great Depression and the stock exchange crashes that resulted from a time when companies could report whatever the hell they wanted. It was magnificent. You could say whatever you wanted about your company. No one was accountable. And shock horror, that led to all kind of shareholder stock market bubbles because information was completely fast and free. And I think that it's also important to recognise that innovation doesn't just come in form of technology or in the form of businesses that come up with great new products. Innovation in regulation and innovation in financial systems is hugely significant. So off the back of the Depression, we had accounting standards start to develop and be standardised, and we had the development of the 30-year mortgage in the US, which came about because so many people lost their houses in the Depression because they were all on these rolling 12-month mortgages where they had to go back to the bank every year, and if you lost your job, you were toast. So I think that, yeah, I really agree, Andrew, that we are seeing fundamental regulations, and what's interesting about them is that people are accepting them so quickly. And I think that's a core responsibility of business as well, which is to accept and work within a regulatory environment, and for heaven's sake, stop lobbying to simply remove obstacles.
Sorry, go Jayne.
I was just going to add in there, I think that there are two elements to that from my perspective as well. I think carbon is suddenly becoming understood as a universal measure across this whole landscape. It applies in every context because it has some kind of input or involvement in virtually every context across our entire marketplace globally. And I think it's also there's been such a move in the last decade towards needing to be able to do that better, that our carbon accounting systems have improved so much that they're more accessible and they're more accurate and they're more reliable. So companies and businesses are feeling more confidence in using them as a measure for the way that they assess their performance. And I think the more that starts to happen, again, that sort of underpins that system change, that the more people get involved in it, the more it becomes a new norm.
Just wanted to ask all the panelists, the announcement this morning of China and the US going to work more closely on climate cooperation. What are your feelings on this? Is it going to happen? Is it going to affect your particular area? Just a bit of an insight. I was interested to see what you thought. Edwina, would you like to start? Or?
Yeah, Graz, I just think what is significant, and there's no granularity about what it looks like, but the significance of the two biggest, economic powerhouses in the world have acknowledged that this is a united problem and that they've got the pull and the capacity to make a difference. That a public acknowledgement, I think, activates so much in terms of commitments by other countries, industries, markets. Just that acknowledgement gives us, it's a really great moment of, it's a moment of real positivity, that, the acknowledgement that everybody's responsible, that everybody has to be in this to make a difference.
I think there's also an element of confidence that it builds confidence as well, Graz. I think that's one of the other things that we hear a lot in our space. People don't want to move and make change because they don't have certainty around what might happen in the future. So it's a bit of a paralysis in a lot of ways in that respect. And I think signals like that build that confidence, and we're the ones that need to hold them to account by pushing forward with what they're committing to, and make sure that they are delivering what they're suggesting that they will. But having that confidence to know that there is an articulated objective here to move in that direction, I think builds the momentum much more substantially.
Andrew,
I'll add my 2 cents worth. I consider it to be the climate change equivalent of détente. We've seen for the first time ever that, to take Edwina's point, two major economic powerhouses, the two biggest emitters in the world, coming together and saying, we are not going to fight over this. We are going to find a way to drive forward decarbonisation across our society. And thinking that we're talking about two fundamentally different economic models here, arguing that this is a combined global societal challenge that needs to be addressed. Now, totally agree about the detail. That is ever thus. But the other important element here is it turns on its head the way in which the COP is going to be considered going forward, because it has historically been seen, particularly in its second week, as this failure, this inability to deliver, countries not coming together to collectively find the solution. And to be frank, a lot of countries have taken advantage of that by saying, oh, well, we didn't get to a big deal. We got a little bit done, but we didn't get the big ticket. That's changed. Overnight, it has changed. And that will have a massive ripple effect on other countries, including Australia, in the next couple of days around what they, as a result, need to respond to. From a point of view of business, I totally agree with Edwina and the element that Jayne injected into it, which is confidence. They will go, great. We now understand at a symbolic level, there is a long-term signal being given by key major economic powerhouses that this is something to invest and do action against as quickly as possible. And I think that it is one of those profound moments in time that we've all been party and been able to witness. And I think we should all have one of those vodkas as a result of it, I think.
Yeah, I have converted you, Andrew.
I would just add to that it also makes it very hard for any other governments to hide behind China's inaction. And I think that's really significant as well. My other observation would be, and I agree, Andrew, with where this COP was heading, really fascinating shift in power here too. And you cannot, I think, underestimate the role of young people, and Greta in particular, going into this COP with such a brutal takedown of all participants. And my first reaction was, why would you do this? You're undermining this, this old perhaps white male conservative perspective, which is like, oh, let's all be reasonable, let's all keep it in the room, and we'll be more effective. Wouldn't you be more effective if you're in the room? And it's just blown me away, the rhetoric. A real interesting shift in power as well. I think that's something that, to your earlier point, Andrew, we'll be looking back on at this time and thinking about what were the shifts in power that actually drove this change as well.
Why it's taken 25 years to do it is anybody's guess, but we'll move on from that.
Okay, Ashleigh, do you want to go to the next question?
Yeah, sure. We've had a couple of other great questions come through. Jayne, what are you most excited about in terms of the circular economy and the opportunities that you see?
Ash, I've been working in this sector for about 17 years now. So just the fact that this stuff's happening excites me about the opportunities for a circular economy. I feel like, I'm very privileged to work in a space where we have businesses that come to us looking to do this. So I work with organisations that are incredibly proactive and seeking out those solutions to their challenges and looking at themselves warts and all and understanding what it is that they need to do. I think the other thing that I find in that space is that those sort of businesses are also looking across the board. So it's not just about packaging, they're looking at their impacts in a holistic kind of way. And, going to what Andrew Davies was saying earlier, it's about that understanding, that whole understanding of a business in terms of what your impacts are and what your contributions to the world are around you, and trying to maximize that for benefit, for the benefit of the environment, for the benefit of the community, for all those people. And that really, I come out of an advocacy space, and to see businesses coming to the table with these sorts of conversations where a decade ago they just weren't even willing to talk about it, I think that signals a monumental shift, and I think we're going to get there. It may take a little while to do so, but there's certainly momentum there that all those other people that aren't doing it are just going to get FOMO and hopefully come along behind, and we'll have everybody in place very soon.
Okay, Edwina, just one for you. How do emissions from cattle actually compare to other sectors?
Oh, Graz, that's a very complicated debate. For us, I guess, the focus for all of us has to be on decarbonisation. That's the key commitment. For the livestock industry, our emissions are enteric methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, but for us, working as part of that carbon cycle is really important. We've had a really big and profound impact in terms of carbon sequestration to reduce our emissions. I guess the next holy grail is having an impact in terms of reducing enteric emissions, and we've got some really powerful technology. At this stage, we have the technology there. It just needs to be scaled, in terms of the feed additives, the red asparagopsis, 3-NOP, really powerful technologies that will really reduce methane emissions within ruminants by up to 80%. So it's now the focus has to be on commercialisation and adoption and escalation of that technology, because the technology and the science is there. I guess for all of us now, the real priority has to be how you commercialise it, how do you adopt it so you get that scale to have the real impact.
Thanks, Edwina. Gosh, what a time to be alive and doing what we're all doing. What a privilege. Andrew, you spoke before about just the growth that you've had, and I just wanted to double check if I got these numbers right. So did I hear correctly that in the last 16 months you've had 4,000 applications and it took 16 years to get to 4,000? Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So not all of those 4,000 applications will become B Corps. And there's a question in the chat as well around, what do we do with businesses that sort of aren't good enough? And the answer to that is our assessment platform is self-assessed. So mostly companies take care of that themselves. It's a platform that's designed to show them where they need to improve. But I think perhaps what's inferred in that question is how do you deal with businesses that are mad keen to certify that perhaps don't have a brand that will necessarily help. Maybe I'm reading too much into that question. And our standards are constantly evolving. It of course that has to happen, and the bar generally goes up. But I think as well it's about having confidence in our own brand and our own processes, and recognising that B Corps aren't perfect and not all B Corps are even. What you really have to look for is genuine improvement and intent to do better. There's an element to certification that we somewhat incredibly boringly call the legal requirement. I've got to come up with a better name. But it's a key plank. It's not just the performance, which is all about our platform and measuring points and so on. The legal requirement is you actually have to embed into your company constitution a commitment to operate for an overall public benefit and to consider stakeholders. And that's directly designed to challenge the board and shareholders and to create alignment between shareholders, board and management, that this company will be run this way, which is usually the way it's currently being run, but it'll be run this way for the long term, and that shareholders are specifically endorsing this. It's in there to really make sure that the remnants of shareholder primacy and the Friedman Doctrine don't creep back in when directors are thinking about their duties and we're acting in the best interest of the company. But it's also a really useful thing to bring to the front of a conversation with a larger business, because whilst the sustainability department might be charging ahead saying, hey, we've got this program, we've got that program, we're earning points in your assessment, it's also really important that the CEO and the board and the shareholders are committed and willing to continue acting in the way that maybe they have been acting when times are tough, when profits are down, when there's a decision that is in the grey spaces. And really, the decisions in the grey spaces are the ones that ultimately really matter. So I think that that's one way that we use as well to really have the hard conversations as early as we can.
Can I drop in there with a bit of an example of exactly what Andrew's talking about there, probably on a slightly higher level at a sectoral sort of discussion level. We just recently launched a roadmap for the dairy industry around packaging sustainability. And it was exactly that exercise of coming together and as an industry looking at everything that they were putting into the marketplace as packaging. We were working with the sustainability level people in the organisations that made up the vast majority of the dairy manufacturing landscape in Australia. So working with quite a big audience there. But once we got to the point of creating that roadmap with the sustainability teams, it was about socialising it throughout the entire businesses that were part of that process. So we ended up getting that high-level CEO endorsement for the document. They digested it, they read it, they worked through it, they understood what we were trying to achieve with that document, and they signed up and supported it. And we've ended up with a great group of very proactive manufacturers, retailers, peripheral service providers, supply chain providers in that group, who are all now committed to a set of objectives. And I have a meeting tomorrow morning with all of them to start talking about how we work towards delivering the objectives that we set out in the document. So that group's grown, it's become more confident and more comfortable with it, and they're all looking to try and deliver these objectives as fast as they possibly can. So yeah, the point of pride there as an industry coming together and delivering on a piece of work like that is not underestimated. And I think at the end of the day, again, a lot of people are getting wind of it and understanding what it means and coming to talk to us about how they can be involved in it and how they can support that process. So yeah, it really drives action when you get that sort of commitment right through the organisation.
Can I just ask a kind of a follow-up question from that? You know, what advice would you all have for someone who might be a sustainability manager, but they haven't yet had that senior board or CEO kind of buy-in? That's not kind of all come together yet. What advice would you have for someone who's a bit frustrated about where things are at from the leadership side?
So that's a challenge. It is very much about, I guess, working with those relationships within the business, finding the support space within the organisation, I guess, and I guess understanding what that, or being able to articulate what the implications of it might be to senior management. I think we talk about some of these benefits that we have with some of the decisions that can be made in this space. Being able to articulate what that is on a broader level. It's not just about the profit, it's about some of the other things that we're talking about in terms of the social impacts, the environmental impacts. Being equipped with that information to be able to articulate that bigger picture, I think, is vital in really being able to engage in those sort of senior level discussions a lot of the time.
I would also say adopt your annoying toddler approach. Keep asking why up the chain. So when management or your CEO is talking about their mission or their vision, keep asking why. So if we're going to be the best in the industry, why? So what? Tim Duggan has a great book called Cult Status, which really has some good exercises for helping turn a mission or a vision into an impact statement. And his technique is to add the words "so that" to the end of any kind of corporate statement to really drill down into what is the point of what we're doing. And I think that the challenge for sustainability managers is that they have subject matter knowledge. They work within the sustainability impacts of that business. where they need to connect with the senior leadership is on the why. You know, what is the point of this business? What is the impact we want to have, and how are we holding ourselves to account?
I think I agree with Andrew. It's about asking questions, being quite comfortable being the dumbest person in the room and just asking questions, having that thirst for knowledge and understanding, and challenging what's been said. What's the acceptable word of wisdom? Challenging that and pushing that, and turning up at events and just being thirsty for that knowledge and that learning, because it all escalates upon itself.
I'll be the radical in the room. Send your CEO and your CFO the link to the Bloomberg terminal, which shows them that companies are now being looked at from this CSR perspective on a regular basis by investors and analysts. And it's 24/7 real time. So if you're not looking at this, then somebody else is, and they're not valuing your business. The most radical advice I would give is get out. To take Andrew's point, if you're not in a company that has the values that you personally ascribe to and that you've passionately articulated for a number of years around, then if the Great Resignation is true, and I suspect that our friends at Talent Nation will affirm the fact that there is a massive recruitment request going on in relation to sustainability professionals, you're probably in the wrong job. You're going to find a better one, better paid, from an organisation that probably values from day one what you want to do.
Okay, thank you everybody for that. We better wrap up because we're a little bit over time, but I want to thank everybody. Look, we heard about frameworks, platforms, ambitious targets, conscious decision to be optimistic, which I love. That's what we try to do. Genuine improvement, intent to do better. And that's what the Banksia Awards recognise. And please, if you are doing something out there that needs recognition and you're leading, please consider entering the Banksia Awards, because we need to inspire others. We need to tell your story. We need to get our leaders, innovators out there in front of not just us, but the broader Australian community, and give everybody the understanding, the hope, the optimism that Andrew talked about, that we are doing it and that we can do better. So I'd like to thank everybody today, and especially thank Ashleigh. Thank you so much for making this possible, and wish everybody well, and we'll see you at our next event. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you for having us. That was great, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.